Right now, as you're watching this, there is a story breaking out of Washington that is sending shockwaves through every corner of the American political establishment. And if you've been following the Jeffrey Epstein saga, buckle up, because this one is different. This is not a rumor. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a verified, confirmed, Reuters exclusive investigation published just days ago on March 11th, 2026. And it reveals something so disturbing about the security of some of the most sensitive criminal files in American history that even seasoned national security experts are calling it jaw-dropping. A foreign hacker, identity unknown, country unknown, broke into the FBI's own servers in New York City back in February of 2023 and spent time quietly combing through files tied to the federal investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender and alleged trafficker who died in a Manhattan jail cell in 2019 under circumstances that remain deeply controversial to millions of Americans. Let that sink in for a moment. The FBI, the most powerful law enforcement agency on the planet, had its servers breached, and the specific files that were targeted were the Epstein files. Not tax records, not random bureaucratic paperwork. The Epstein files. And here's the part that makes this story even more explosive. This breach happened nearly 3 years ago, and the American public is only finding out about it now, buried inside a massive document dump that the Justice Department was legally forced to release. Nobody at the top of this government wanted you to know this. And tonight, we are going to walk through every single detail of what happened, what it means, and why this story connects directly to President Donald Trump in ways that his administration is not comfortable explaining. Let's go back to the beginning of this story, because context is everything here. Jeffrey Epstein was not just a wealthy financier who happened to commit crimes. He was a man who, according to investigators, spent decades building a network of connections with some of the most powerful people on earth: politicians, billionaires, foreign royalty, business titans, and yes, multiple presidents. For years, his victims, many of them teenage girls, have fought in courts and in public for accountability, for answers, and for the full truth about who knew what and when. When Donald Trump ran for president in 2024, he made a public promise. He said he would release the Epstein files. His allies, including J.D. Vance and Donald Trump Jr., hammered the Biden administration relentlessly, accusing them of hiding a so-called client list. The promise of releasing those files became a rallying cry, a symbol of transparency, of draining the swamp, of finally giving the American people the truth they deserved. But then something happened after Trump took office. The files started coming out, yes, but only partially, heavily redacted, thousands of pages blacked out. And a July 2025 memo from the Justice Department quietly concluded that there was no client list, that there was no blackmail operation, and that Epstein's death was, in fact, a suicide. The backlash from Trump's own base was fierce and immediate. This was not the reckoning people had been promised. And now, on top of all of that, we have just learned that before any of this public release even happened, before a single page was officially made available to the American people, a foreign actor had already been inside those files. Here is exactly what Reuters reported, and this is important because every detail matters. According to a source familiar with the matter and documents published by the Justice Department, on February 12, 2023, a server at the Child Exploitation Forensic Lab inside the FBI's New York field office was breached by a hacker. The server was left vulnerable, and this is key, not by some systemic failure or sophisticated attack, but because a single FBI special agent named Aaron Spivak was attempting to navigate the Bureau's notoriously complex procedures for handling digital evidence and inadvertently left the server exposed. The hack was discovered the very next day, on February 13th, 2023, when Spivak turned on his computer and found a text file sitting there, a message left by the hacker telling him that his network had been compromised. When investigators dug deeper, they found traces of unusual activity on the server. According to the Justice Department documents reviewed by Reuters, that activity included, and these are the words in the official document, combing through certain files pertaining to the Epstein investigation. Now, Reuters was careful and honest about what is still unknown here. They could not determine exactly which files were accessed. They do not know if any data was downloaded. They do not know the identity of the hacker. They do not know what country that person was operating from. and they do not know whether any effort was ever made to identify or punish whoever did this. The FBI, for its part, called it an isolated cyber incident. They said they contained the affected network, restricted access to the malicious actor, and secured the server. But the investigation, they noted, remains ongoing. An ongoing investigation into a breach that happened 3 years ago, into the Epstein files. And we're only hearing about the Epstein connection now. If you want to understand just how significant this breach potentially is, not just legally, but geopolitically, you have to listen to what John Lindsay said. He is a researcher at the Georgia Institute of Technology who studies the role of emerging technology in global security. And when Reuters asked him about this hack, his response was blunt and chilling. He said, and I'm going to paraphrase this carefully to be accurate. He asked rhetorically who wouldn't be going after the Epstein files if you were the Russians or any foreign government interested in compromising material. He said that if foreign intelligence agencies were not seriously targeting the Epstein files as an intelligence asset, he would be shocked. Think about what that means. The Epstein files don't just contain information about crimes. According to multiple investigators and legal filings, Epstein had relationships with some of the most powerful figures in American and global politics. People who, if compromised, could be leveraged in extraordinary ways. That is the definition of what intelligence agencies call compromat, damaging information used to coerce, manipulate, or control. And now we know that someone, a foreign actor, was inside those files before the world ever got to see them. Someone out there may know things that the American public still does not know. And there is currently no answer about whether that information has been used, shared, sold, or weaponized. Now here is where this story intersects with President Trump in a way that is impossible to ignore. And I want to be very clear, because this channel is about facts, not speculation. No criminal wrongdoing has ever been established against Donald Trump in connection with Epstein's crimes. Trump has repeatedly and emphatically denied any wrongdoing and has distanced himself from Epstein. Those are the facts. But the facts also include this. Trump and Epstein were acquainted for well over a decade. In 2002, Trump called Epstein, and these are Trump's own words to New York Magazine, a terrific guy. In December 2025, when the Justice Department released nearly 30,000 pages of Epstein-related documents, those files contained multiple references to Trump. One internal DOJ email, sent in January of 2020 from a U.S. attorney, noted that flight records showed Trump had traveled on Epstein's private jet. And the email specifically said it was many more times than had previously been reported or known. There were references to Trump in the context of a 14-year-old girl who alleged being brought to Mar-a-Lago in 1994. The Justice Department said the files contained what it called untrue and sensationalist claims about Trump. But then, and this is where it gets really uncomfortable, an NPR investigation published in February of 2026 found that the DOJ had quietly removed or withheld specific pages from the public database. Dozens of pages, FBI interview notes, files that specifically referenced allegations against Trump. Gone. Missing. Not released despite a law, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, signed by Trump himself, mandating full disclosure. The NPR investigation found serial number gaps in the documents, indicating pages that were cataloged but never published. The Justice Department declined to answer NPR's questions about what was in those missing pages or why they weren't released. If you are new to this channel and you've made it this far into this video, I want to ask you to do one thing right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is not over. This is a living, breathing, developing situation, and we are going to keep covering every single development as it happens, so that you have the facts, the context, and the full picture that mainstream media too often fails to provide. Let's keep going, because there's more to this story that connects the hacking revelation to the broader political crisis swirling around the Trump administration right now. In November of 2025, Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act with overwhelming bipartisan support. The Senate passed it unanimously. Trump signed it into law, but notably, without reporters present, which itself raised eyebrows at the time. The law mandated the full release of all eligible DOJ records related to Epstein. What followed was a release process that critics on both sides of the aisle described as a failure. The first batch, released in December of 2025, was criticized for being heavily redacted and for containing almost no references to Trump. Then a second, larger batch came out days later, nearly 30,000 pages, and that one had wide-ranging Trump references, prompting the DOJ to publicly state that the files contained untrue and sensationalist claims against the president. In January of 2026, another massive release came. Over 3 million pages, including 2,000 videos and 180,000 images. The DOJ then declared that this was the final release and that it had met its legal obligations, even while acknowledging that approximately 6 million pages total might qualify for release under the law. That gap between 3 million released and 6 million that potentially should have been has not been explained. Bipartisan senators have since asked the Government Accountability Office to investigate the Justice Department's handling of the entire release process. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie, who co-sponsored the original transparency bill, publicly stated that the release grossly failed to comply with both the spirit and the letter of the law and warned that a future DOJ could potentially pursue legal consequences against current officials for their handling of these documents. And into all of this, the missing pages, the redactions, the bipartisan outrage, the ongoing legal challenges, falls this bombshell from Reuters. The files were hacked, years before the public ever saw them, by a foreign actor, on a server that was left open by accident. There is a surreal quality to this story that is hard to put into words. For years, millions of Americans demanded the truth about Epstein. They demanded names. They demanded accountability. They demanded to know what powerful men knew and when they knew it. And now we are learning that at some point in February of 2023, someone overseas, possibly a cybercriminal, possibly someone with deeper geopolitical motives, we genuinely do not know, may have already found at least some of those answers. And unlike the American public, that unknown person was not bound by FOIA exemptions or legal mandates or presidential prerogatives. They just went in and looked. According to sources cited by Reuters, this hacker apparently didn't even realize at first that they had broken into a federal law enforcement server. They reportedly expressed disgust at finding child abuse images on the device. They left a threatening note saying they were going to report the server's owner to the FBI, unaware, apparently, that they were already inside the FBI. At some point, FBI officials reached out and attempted to communicate with the hacker, reportedly going so far as to invite the person to a video call and showing them credentials to prove they were, in fact, the Bureau. The hacker eventually backed off. But what they accessed before that conversation happened, nobody can say for certain. The intelligence implications of this are staggering if you think them through. Foreign intelligence services, particularly adversaries of the United States, have long sought information that could give them leverage over American political figures. Epstein's network was, by multiple accounts, a treasure trove of exactly that kind of material. His operation allegedly involved the systematic recruitment and abuse of underage girls, often in the presence of wealthy and powerful men. If detailed records of those encounters existed, and the FBI's forensic files suggest they did, then whoever had access to those records would possess extraordinary leverage over some of the most powerful people in the world. The academic cited by Reuters, John Lindsay from Georgia Tech, made a point that every American should sit with. He said foreign intelligence agencies would have to be completely asleep at the wheel not to have been seriously pursuing these files as an intelligence target. The fact that a breach happened, even one that appears to have been carried out by a cybercriminal rather than a state actor, underscores just how valuable those files are considered to be on the global intelligence market. And here's the part that no official in Washington wants to talk about directly. What if this wasn't the only breach? The FBI says this 2023 incident was isolated, but the Bureau also said the investigation is ongoing. The DOJ has not released all the files it is legally required to release. Multiple pages connected to Trump-related allegations are missing from the public database. And the hacker who was inside the FBI servers in New York in February of 2023 has never been identified, never been charged, and for all anyone knows, is still out there with whatever data they accessed. This is not a fringe concern. This is a legitimate national security question being raised by cybersecurity experts, former intelligence officials, and bipartisan lawmakers. And it is happening in the context of a presidency that is deeply, personally implicated in the broader Epstein story in ways that are still unfolding. What does Trump himself have to say about all of this? Well, in January of 2026, he announced he was considering suing writer Michael Wolff and possibly the Epstein estate after the New York Times reported that Trump and Epstein were once best friends. Trump has consistently denied that characterization, calling Epstein not a friend and labeling the ongoing demands for more file releases as a hoax perpetrated by Democrats. He called some of his own supporters who continued pushing for full disclosure stupid and foolish. A remarkable turn for a man who built significant political capital on the promise of releasing everything. His former ally Elon Musk had even publicly stated in June of 2025 that the reason the Epstein files weren't being fully released was because Trump's name was in them, a claim the DOJ denied. The fractures within the MAGA movement over this issue have been visible and growing, and the revelation that foreign hackers were inside those files long before the American public ever got to see them is only going to deepen the suspicion, the frustration, and the demand for real answers. What we are left with tonight is a story that has more open questions than closed ones, but the questions themselves are extraordinary. Who is this foreign hacker? What country were they operating from? What specific Epstein files did they access? Did they download anything? Has that information been used? Has any foreign government or foreign actor used the contents of those files for leverage against American political figures? Is that leverage being applied right now in ways that affect American foreign policy, American national security decisions, or American domestic politics? We don't know. The FBI says the investigation is ongoing. The DOJ has not provided answers. And the Trump administration, whose leader is named repeatedly throughout the very files that were hacked, has shown every indication of wanting this story to go away rather than to be fully investigated and fully disclosed. This story deserves your attention. It deserves the attention of every journalist, every lawmaker, every American citizen who believes that the rule of law means something and that no man, regardless of his title, should be above accountability. The Epstein files were hacked. Foreign hands may have touched material that could rock the foundations of American power. And the people who are supposed to protect you from exactly this kind of threat are the same people who have been fighting tooth and nail to keep the contents of those files away from you. If this video gave you something to think about, if it gave you facts you didn't have before, then share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear this story, because the only way accountability happens in this country is when the public demands it loudly enough that it can't be ignored. We will continue covering every development in this story as it happens. Stay with us, stay informed, and don't let them bury this.